it does still take 3 or 4 years to learn the basics. On the 3 series of works that I've been working on for the last 7 years, probably still got about another 5 or 6 years to go before I complete it. It's not a quick technique. When I was in art school, I used to read a lot of technical books on art, just to look at old sort of techniques. I came across mezzotint in a book by Stanley Hayter called New Ways of Gravure. I just saw a reproduction of a Japanese artist's work, and it struck me as being something totally different from all the other types of printmaking. And luckily RMIT had the tool that you use for the main part of the process. No one had any idea how to use it, so it was just trial and error from there. And then I went over to England, and I had to search around for try and find other artists that use the technique. There's one Italian artist, and I went over to Italy to try and find him. And then I went to England and just had a look spent a few months at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where they had a print room where I could look at all the 18th century mezzotints. So it just sort of all started from there. It had been a very popular technique in the 18th century, but it completely faded out. So when I started, there were only sort of half a dozen people in the world using the technique. So it just sort of came partly out of curiosity and partly because I realised it was one of the few printmaking techniques where you could get complete 3D rendering. And I suppose, just curiosity that no one was using it. I loved drawing, even as a child. We moved to Hobart when I was 2, and then we stayed there till I was 13. We lived in a place called Howrah. It was fairly wild back in the late 60s. A lot of bush and things around, so it was a great sort of place to grow up. Hobart was in those days, very similar to down here. It's one of the reasons I think that attracted me to living down here by the beach. And then my father changed jobs and we moved back to Melbourne and pretty much straight into suburbia, so it was a completely different sort of lifestyle. By matriculation, as it was then called, I decided I wanted to go to art school and try being an artist as my life. I started off in painting, did first year painting. At that point in time, they didn't have a first year printmaking course, so I hadn't ever heard of printmaking before I started at RMIT. And then I switched to printmaking in second year and did second and third year printmaking. It was sort of the end of the era of big abstraction or American abstraction, and I was more interested in figurative art. And I just enjoyed printmaking in first year and thought I could always go back to painting eventually. Just decided I'd give printmaking a go. Staff was Tate Adams and George Balderson were the main ones, and Tay Kok Wee. The first sort of attempts were pretty hopeless, and it wasn't until third year art school I took it on as a full main medium. It's very, very simple. It's one of the simplest techniques in terms of what you do. It's also one of the most complex in terms of making the image. The process involves using a tool called a rocker, which has very fine teeth on it. So you pass that back and forth all over the copper plate in a number of different directions, usually 28, 30 different directions. And each time you rock it sideways, it kicks up a tiny little burr of metal which holds ink around it when you're printing. So you make millions and millions of these little burrs of metal. The more burrs of metal you have, the darker the plate will print, the more tonal range you can have. You sharpen about every 2 passes over the copper plate. Normally do about 20. I do 28 passes. Some artists do up to 100. Depends on what sort of ground you want. And then you just scrape them back off again. The more you scrape off, the lighter it'll print in that spot. So you get very smoky black backgrounds and just very intense images. So you get your rendering that way. So you can see exactly what you're doing when you're scraping the image. It's something that's not like using acids and things in other forms of printmaking. You can see exactly what you're doing, exactly what image you're creating. Scrapers that you use were originally developed for correcting mistakes in etching. We also use agate burnishes now that were originally used for putting gold leaf on frames, on picture frames. But basically, you can do it with 2 tools. One of the things that appeals to me about the medium is that you don't need a great deal of equipment. It's fairly portable. You are working in negative and you're also working back the front because the image comes out back the front. But you just get used to it. After 40 years, I sort of still get confused sometimes about forgetting to do the image backwards, but just get used to it. So the difference between mezzotint and other intaglio techniques is you're lifting the metal above the original surface of the plate, whereas etching techniques you're digging down. So it's quite opposite. So the darkest areas are going to be highest on the plate, and then the lowest, the white areas or your light tones are the lowest areas on the plate. So it's completely opposite. Normally you try and get the ground as perfect as you can without being too mechanical, because the better the ground is, the better the image will look. So marks, scratches, things like that will tend to come through. Well, the time aspect doesn't really come into it for me. I mean, initially I wasn't expecting it to take as long as it does. Depends on what the image is and how complex it is and what you're doing. It always used to really annoy me in my first solo shows. Any sort of critics in the paper, they used to do long explanations of the technique, and I was sort of more interested in hearing what people thought of the imagery. Very early days, I was picking imagery that I thought would suit the medium, so I used a lot of bones and still life type imagery, a lot of fruit and vegetables, that sort of thing. That gradually changed when we moved down here in the mid-1980s. Some of the marine creatures and things started to develop in my work. I had a period of about 10 years when I was going up to the Snowy Mountains, where I did a lot of cloudscapes just based on the skies up there. Some of the cloudscape pictures I did, which are fairly abstract, just the shapes from tarnishing on the plates would suggest something, and I'd work things like that into it. So it depends entirely on the concept to begin with. I was doing some work with shells, and I read about the discovery of some abalone shells in a cave in South Africa that were 10,000 years old and been used to hold pigments for cave painting. And it sort of struck me at the time that it was very similar to, or the idea of people going down caves to make paintings that most people would never see was very similar to graffiti artists today going down tunnels and sewage pipes, whatever, and making graffiti art that most people will never see. So it sort of occurs to me that we have these aspects of human behaviour that just don't change for whatever reason. The process of rocking up the plate's very meditative, but at the same time I'm also thinking about what sort of image I'm going to be making on the plate, because I never draw an image of what I'm going to do first. I work directly onto my plates. So I'll have an idea of what I want the whole image to look like, but then it develops over time so that it can be transformed while I'm working on it. So a lot of those sort of things come into play. I sort of have my own point of view, but then allow other people to have their own interpretation of the work. So a lot of it's to do with human behaviour and human foibles, not in a sort of moralistic way, but more in a sort of humorist way. A lot of the imagery is very ambiguous, and I don't really mind how people interpret it. I have my own sort of point of view, and as far as I'm concerned, what other people think's up to them, really. I had a situation about 5 or 6 years ago where I woke up and couldn't move my right arm, my whole right arm had seized up, my tendon had seized up. So I had to take 6 months off at that point. So now I don't push myself as hard physically, or I stopped working when I realised that the physical side is getting on top of me. But yeah, my doctor did tell me to take up painting instead of mezzotint, but he's one of my fishing mates, so he knows exactly what I do. But no, as far as I'd like to keep mezzotinting, I'll probably just cut down the size rather than in the scale of what I do. I'm not that concerned about having lots more exhibitions. I'd rather, because of the physical side of doing mezzotints and having done them for 40 years, I've had to just slow down the amount of work. I've had problems with tendons in my arms, things like that. So I've just changed my work practice. So I'm not so concerned about exhibiting, having big shows anymore. I'm just sort of gradually want to get this body of work completed, and I don't really care about sort of just racking up another half a dozen solo shows. I just want to get one or two more out, and I'd rather be totally satisfied with the work rather than having lots more shows, I suppose. I've got these 3 streams of work that are going through in the current show, and I expected it's at least another 5 years' work to finish this lot off. So after that, who knows? Start again.